minister or whatever. But we still need to strengthen it, and I think you're going to see a little effort to do that. The world we live in today is very different than what it was when this week began. Very different indeed. And we should make sure that these agencies responsible for protecting American citizens against terror are not forced to fight this critical battle with one arm tied behind them. Having said all that, the topic at hand today is the energy business. And though it seems like a million years since I was out there in the business trenches, like you all are, following a dream, working to build something with my career, I always enjoy the opportunity to visit with executives who lead dynamic companies, who work with and for dynamic companies, particularly in the industry where I spent some 17 years. Lodestar provides a very valuable service to the energy industry. I know that, and my friends in that business know that too. I left the oil business, 36 years ago, but my interest has never diminished. In many ways, in fact, it intensified during my public service, because what so many companies like the ones that some of you represent here today do have a direct effect on our country's national security, as well as our vital strategic interests around the world.
Interesting transition here as we just pipe down for a second. Former President Bush's audio, the 41st president. On the right-hand part of your screen, you're seeing the arrival of the 43rd president, his son, President George W. Bush. He is arriving at Washington Hospital Center. He had mentioned this when we were listening in earlier when he was talking to Mayor Giuliani and Governor Pataki. He's going there today to visit victims recovering from the plane crash into the Pentagon on Tuesday, doing that to show his support and wish them well. We'll keep that picture up, and we'll bring the sound back up on former President Bush.
Right now. The guy in the back jumped up and said, yeah, if you weren't president, I'd be buying stock right now. So I'm not going to tell you guys how to run your business or what Chris ought to be doing differently. But I have to say, I was fascinated in doing a little homework to learn.
We will get back to the comments of former President Bush in just a minute, but we do want to go to this picture live. Once again, this is the arrival of the current President Bush, his son, President Bush, arriving at Washington Hospital Center. He had mentioned this earlier. He's showing up here to show his support for those that survived the plane crash into the Pentagon on Tuesday and are at this hospital recovering from their injuries.
Yeah, we just heard the former President Bush pretty much get to the end of his remarks about this current situation. He's calling it a new era as far as the U.S. Is concerned. And as we're seeing now, the former President George W. Bush is about to get out of the vehicle, and I think he may have already gotten out.
Let's go ahead and bring in our Kelly Wallace, who's standing by at the White House. Kelly, the president mentioned earlier that he was coming here to show his support. Of course, he can't visit everybody in the hospital who's recovering from the tragedy of Tuesday.
No, exactly, Darren. You heard him say he wishes he could comfort every family and every victim of this tragedy. The president going to this hospital, I believe the First Lady expected to join the president here to visit with victims of course, the crash into the Pentagon, and also the president wanting to thank all the doctors and nurses who have been working very hard, pulling in overtime hours, really doing everything they can to help the victims and comfort them. Darren, I was just struck as we listened to the former president just about sort of the similarities here. There's just so much to talk about. You know, the former president saying that he talks to his son quite regularly. He said, well, he's been doing that since George W. Bush has been a little boy, and so he's going to continue that. He says they don't always talk about policy. Very much sometimes it's just sort of a close family staying in touch, but we do know that the president...
Kelly, let me just interrupt you just for a second, because there we see President and Mrs. Bush as they go ahead and walk into the hospital. But I did pick up on the same thing as you were saying, that he was talking about his relationship, father and son, former president, current president, and also as he was making his remarks, that the former president, you reminded the wealth of experience that former President Bush has as head of the intelligence community, as an ambassador, as vice president under President Reagan, and of course as president. He has to be an enormous resource, not just for the country, but especially for his son.
Exactly, and we've always asked, we just asked Ari Fleischer, in fact, yesterday, because we know that the president did talk with his father on Tuesday aboard Air Force One. That was after, I believe, certainly some of the attacks were already underway. The White House never commenting exactly on the sort of subject of the conversation, to say sometimes the president talks to his father as a father and sometimes more for advice. But just as you're mentioning, you have the former president, many of the top officials in his administration who handled the Persian Gulf War. His defense secretary, Dick Cheney, serves as the president's vice president. And of course, Colin Powell, who is now, of course, the Secretary of State. And there are just a lot of similarities. You heard the former president say that his son, his administration is trying to build an international coalition, and that after the U.S. does that, the president will determine what to do. Well, there have been a lot of comparisons made with the international coalition that the former president put together to, of course, deal with the Persian Gulf War and Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Another similarity in terms of going to Congress, and you even heard the former president mention the importance of going to Congress. The president calling for some type of joint resolution, which would basically a use of force resolution, the U.S. to retaliate for those attacks. That resolution being compared to a resolution passed by Congress in 1991 that gave his father really the authority, the go-ahead for force against Iraq after the invasion against Kuwait. So just so many similarities, really, between his father's administration and in a way, what the president is coping with right now. Darren.
Kelly Waltz at the White House. Kelly, thank you very much. And as you were talking, we were seeing pictures of reporters being allowed into the hospital where the president is visiting those victims of the crash at the Pentagon. Looks like we're going to get pictures of that visit. So when we do, we'll show them to you here at CNN.
All right, well, in the meantime, let's update you on some of the major developments that we've got up to this particular hour as we're bringing our extensive coverage of America under attack. Now, the very latest, President Bush talked by phone to New York Governor George Pataki and Mayor Rudolph Giuliani a moment ago. Mr. Bush told them that he plans to travel to New York tomorrow. Now, when he gets there, you'll understand that New York City is in the process still of recovering. They're asking now for more body bags to be brought to that city. As a matter of fact, we understand now that there are some 94 bodies that have been recovered, and they've been numbered to be identified. And of that 94, 46 of them have been identified. As of now, there are 4,763 people still considered missing in New York. Now, authorities are saying that the number of fatalities expected at the Pentagon, moving south of Washington there now, is around 190. That is the latest number that we have gotten from the Pentagon. They're saying now that fatalities are about 190, and according to the information that we've been told here at CNN, of that 190, the highest ranking officer is a 3-star Army general in that number. Now, some of the suspected hijackers' identities are now being revealed, along with where they may have gotten their aircraft training. And before we move on, I want to also advise folks about this one other note. Just as of 37 minutes ago, Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta announced that the airspace has been reopened. We understand now there is a website that you can go to check and see if your plane, if your airport rather, has been open. That is fly.faa.gov. I just checked it a second ago, and as I counted, there are almost 70 airports that have been cleared, saying that the airport security there has been certified and is now operationally available.
Right, and once again, that website, fly.faa.gov, very important to remember the dot between the fly and the FAA. That's one thing. There's a look at it right there, and we'll keep track of that as well. We also have people stationed at airports throughout the country. We're watching it for you as well. The airspace is reopening, as Leon mentioned, as we heard the Transportation Secretary mention earlier. This is a slow process, folks. It is not going to be at full speed. Let's take a look at airports around the country. LaGuardia was one of the first ones to open. We've been hearing different reports that it was open, then it wasn't open. So once again, before you head down to LaGuardia or any other airport, you want to go ahead and call ahead or check a website. Let's check the middle of the country. Detroit Metropolitan Airport is one of the many airports that has received approval of its stepped-up security. The FAA's new restrictions apply not only to airports, but also to airlines and to passengers. It is going to be a new way to travel.
LaGuardia, I just checked. LaGuardia is on the fly.faa.gov list as being open right now.
Okay.
All right. New York City took a double hit in Tuesday's horrific attacks. You know that by now. But looking there now, we see rescuers digging round the clock through the mounds of steel and concrete that were once the 110-story twin World Trade Center towers. The rescuers are searching now for survivors. And in many cases, they're finding only body parts. New York's mayor says 4,763 people have been reported missing, and thousands of body bags have been made available. Attorney General John Ashcroft says the hijackers who steered the planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon had been trained as pilots in the U.S. and had significant ground support.
We were talking about the Pentagon. A live picture now right at the crash site where that plane plowed in to the center of the military. We were just talking about that because President Bush paying a visit to many of the victims that were injured in that crash. As Leon was mentioning, authorities expect the number of fatalities right now, their current number, to be around 190. That includes those killed aboard the jetliner that slammed into the building on Tuesday. The bodies of the Pentagon will be taken to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware. The remains are expected to begin arriving at Dover sometime this afternoon. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is open and they've asked employees to report for work there. And as Leon also mentioned, so far the highest ranking officer that we have heard of so far that has lost his life, a 3-star general, although we do not have an identification on that general yet.
Army general. We do know that much, yes. Now, a candlelight vigil was held last night in Washington as people there and across the country mourn those killed at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and that plane crash in Pennsylvania as well. Let's not forget that scene. For many New Yorkers, the grief and the shock is incomprehensible. Hundreds of New Yorkers turned out for a vigil last night. Such memorials were also held in towns and cities from coast to coast across the country.
From Washington, D.C., we want to go to the other side, of course, that we've been covering in this, New York City. Our Paula Zahn and Aaron Brown standing by there. They're actually on the street.
A building here in Midtown Manhattan has been evacuated because of what's being described as an unspecified bomb threat. I can tell you because I, just by happenstance, happened to be in that building that the evacuation itself was extremely orderly. People certainly were afraid. There was some crying going on. People in the city are tense because of what's gone on since Tuesday, but the evacuation itself moved very slowly, very carefully, and very thoughtfully. Police are working the building to try and find out if there's anything to this threat at all, but this building has been evacuated. We went through a very similar thing, Paula, when you and I were on the air last night, when Penn Plaza was evacuated in roughly the same area.
And it's interesting, I was on the air when this evacuation came down. Governor Pataki and Mayor Giuliani were just wrapping up their news conference, and we got a signal from a producer who came out to the platform and says, you guys got to shut this down now. The immediate response of most of us trying to get, I've been in this building for 3 days. I needed help finding the stairwell. We all got on our cell phones, and I think we had the same response that many of the folks did in the World Trade Center. You want to establish contact with your family, which I did. I called my husband, let him know what floor we were on, and I would describe it as just as orderly as you did. Unfortunately, as you reported last night at 10:15, this may become a way of life of these bomb threats that are not credible. And 5 minutes, I will tell you, 5 minutes before we were evacuated, I had just reported that LaGuardia International Airport had been evacuated. Now, I don't know what has transpired in the 20 minutes since we left the set, if there was a credible bomb threat there or not.
In any case, the building has been evacuated. Everything's fine. Police are working the problem. There were I'm just being told this, so bear with me, you guys, 2 phone calls to 2 separate firms. And the building made a decision to evacuate, and nobody's quarreling with that decision, not in this city, not these days, not given what has happened. Back to you guys.
All right, thank you very much, Aaron and Paula. I don't think they can hear us while they're on the street there, but I do want to say, most important, to be safe and, of course, follow any directions as we try to get through this. Aaron Brown and Paula Zahn. Paula also mentioned that she had heard that LaGuardia was shut down. The latest information we're getting is that LaGuardia is operational. But once again, we encourage you either to call ahead to the airline or check on the internet before you head down to the airport. And when you do, of course, patience is a key.
Yeah,
Leon.
And that's just what we did, check the internet. The FAA has set up a website for those of you who are concerned about the airport that you need to be going to or getting away from. The website is, the address is www.fly.faa.gov. Now, I've just checked that website, and I just noticed that Dallas-Fort Worth DFW is not on the list. We have our Ed Lavandera standing by there now live. Let's go check in with him. Ed, what are you seeing and hearing there?
Well, Leon, just about an hour ago, we spoke with officials here at DFW Airport, and they had told us that the FAA had certified all of the security arrangements that they've made over the last 48 hours. We were told by the airport here that we can expect flights to start resuming later on this afternoon. You can see here at one of the terminals at American Airlines. Of course, American Airlines corporate headquarters are located here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. A lot of folks here starting to make their arrangements to try to get to their destinations. A lot of people who were en route had to stop here. Some 900 passengers, we understand, were put up in accommodations here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. But as far as we understand,